Hello, everybody. This is Dale. I just wanted to pop in before we start the podcast because I have a little bit of explaining to do. So what happened was, as you could probably already know, we had Dave Breakenridge back on the podcast, but we had a lot of technical difficulties that in no way, shape, or form are my fault or reflect badly on my character. So anyways, what happened was usually we record the podcast by going live to Facebook. So we record a great big long like thing as it happens, and I don't edit anything, and I kind of just trim the beginning and then trim the end and then put it up as like a YouTube video and the recorded podcast. I like to do it that way because it makes it feel more natural and like more of a conversational tone, so you don't get like a more stuttery kind of podcast thing. Because I've noticed personally when I'm listening to a podcast and there's a lot of edits, maybe even if you don't consciously realize that they're there, you subconsciously pick it up, and it kind of just makes you feel kind of, I don't know, like uncomfortable-ish, like someone's rushing you. Like, you know that feeling when someone's rushing you and you're like, "Eek." It just feels like that because the tone of the talking and stuff, like there's not the natural cadence as people are talking. And so that's why in the past there's been a lot of ums and ahs in our podcast, which I'm fine with and I like to keep. Um, yeah, because I wanted to keep it natural. But since we had so much problems with this podcast, I didn't want to scrap the whole thing because Dave has great insight on the topics we were talking about because he's the managing editor of a major newspaper in Canada, the Edmonton Sun and the Edmonton Journal. So his take on the whole beheading thing, not like people not saying it's beheading, was something I thought was valuable and I wanted to keep it. So I'm going to salvage the podcast, but I just wanted to pop in just to give you a little heads up that there's going to be a lot of edits. And especially if you're watching this on video, it might look choppy. So there might be like a couple little seconds of black, not seconds, but like a microsecond, because I wanted to kind of cut out where the video froze or we lost Dave's audio. And I wanted to leave in some of the points where like I was talking to myself with Dave gone, because I figured in the podcast that might express to you guys, the listener, what had actually happened. But after editing the whole thing, I just felt like it would be fair to give you guys a heads up and be like, this is what's happening. You will see edits like you haven't seen before on the podcast. And then towards the end, Dave actually loses video completely and comes in as just audio. So basically you're watching my face while Dave's talking and you just see my reaction, which it's not very entertaining. So I'm sorry for video watchers that this might be a little subpar of what you're used to. Like you might not get this super grade A. I was going to say sexual there, but I figured that's gross. You don't really want to hear that. So, yeah, that's basically what happened. I'm going to put this in before even the theme music starts, just to give everybody a little heads up. I'm not going to ramble on the preamble too much, but I just wanted to give you all a heads up because I care about you, and everybody's feelings are deeply important to me and the podcast as a whole. Thank you for your time, and now enjoy your regular scheduled podcast. Hello, Internet. How are you? Sorry, we're a half hour late. It's all Dave's fault. No, just kidding. We were having problems with the internet. Apparently, it's Saturday, and since it's fall and winter starting, everybody's on the internet in the world, and it doesn't want to just relegate specific bandwidth for the Outrage Factory.
Which is an outrage.
Ironically. So what we're going to do is we've had problems, and the last episode, I don't know if everybody noticed, I kind of talked at the same time as Adrian. So we're going to do an awkward thing where I'll have a pause and then Dave will know I'm not trying to talk or whatever, so we don't talk over each other as much. So if it's more awkward than my podcast usually is, I'm sorry, but it's free. You get what you paid for. So the reason I wanted
Hi.
to have,
Is this you paused? So I assume I can say hello.
yeah, you could say hello. Sorry. I thought you were waiting for me to say something else. It's very awkward. We do like old CB talk where it's after I say everything, I just say over and then and Roger. Let me see. Okay, let's get into it. So, Dave, I decided to have you on the podcast because you are a professional news person. Your title is, oh God, you told me last time you were on the podcast. I can't remember. You're editor of the Edmonton
I'm
Sun.
the man. I'm the managing editor of the Edmonton Sun and the Edmonton Journal. I also host a podcast called 10-3. And so yeah, I'm a professional news person. Uh, yeah, I gave up
Nice.
my amateur status years ago.
And now you're just cutting down. No entry level deals anymore because you used up all your seasons. Um, Yeah, I also want to recommend everybody go listen to 10-3. It's a news podcast, and it's nice because you guys tackle one subject at a time on there, and it's only, what is it, 15 to 20 minutes long each episode?
Yeah, about that 15 to 20 minutes. Try and gives us enough time to get into a story, but not so long that like it may be longer than your drive to work, stuff like that. We try and keep it brief for commuters, but otherwise, yeah, we should like kind of drill down on one story that journalists in our company, Post Media, have been working on.
Yeah. So everybody should go listen to that. And there's no weird, awkward pauses in it like there is on here.
Just my halting William Shatner style of speaking.
Oh, I was going to ask you, since you're on this podcast, can I get a deal on Callaway Clubs? Since that's the main advertiser on your podcast.
When I get some clubs, I'll get you. Yeah, I sadly I did not get out to play any golf this summer, but
Yeah,
happy to have a sponsor.
I think everybody was a little occupied with other things going on.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, the whole angle of the News Insider thing I wanted to. So since we're having this awkward thing, I'll just set you up and then you could give us your opinion on it. So in France a couple days ago, a history teacher, I think he was in middle school, was beheaded and by an uh, Islamist extremist as a reaction to this teacher showing caricatures of Muhammad. And I don't want to talk about if this is good or bad or get into the murky quagmire of Islam, like violence in the name of Islam and stuff. Obviously, I don't agree with any violence on behalf of any religion. But what I wanted to talk to Dave about was a lot of newspapers are approaching this story in different ways, like Reuters, which is the international kind of newswire for all newspapers to pick up, said that the history teacher was knifed to death, whereas other news organizations, even CTV News, for like the Canadian angle, are saying that it is a beheading. So I just wanted to get Dave's opinion on maybe why some news organizations aren't saying the words beheading if it's too graphic of a description or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it gets pretty tricky. Even I saw one story where the headline referenced a stabbing, referenced that this teacher was stabbed to death, and then the story itself referenced the fact that he was decapitated or beheaded. And I know that there are some sensitivities in the news business when it comes to words that get used in headlines. You want to be salacious, but at the same time, news organizations may, not want to have some of the more graphic words on their homepage because they may consider themselves a family newspaper or something. I'm not sure that I necessarily buy into that argument, or if people are making that argument, but I know there's certain things that come into play when you're writing headlines and when you're writing stories, even that sometimes there is a line that you can cross into being too graphic. And you've in Canada there was the gentleman on the Greyhound bus in Manitoba who beheaded somebody and who I believe was cut out, disemboweled one of the victims on this bus, uh, and was eating his insides. It was a very graphic story, but I also remember a lot of those details were reported in the news, and I think it is bizarre to see stories that just call something a stabbing when it very much does not sound like a stabbing. Even knife attack seems fairly sanitized for what actually happened to this teacher.
All right. So I think we lost Dave. And I don't know. Do you guys want to just watch me talk to myself and Dave's still pitcher? I mean, I'm pretty good at talking, but I don't know if I'm podcast by myself with no one to bounce off of good at talking.
I can just bob my eyebrows up and down for a couple hours and nod intelligently while you talk.
Okay, perfect. Maybe a plane flew overhead and the internet bounced off the bottom of it and went into a mountain, so it didn't work. So I
Yeah.
just want to backtrack you a couple seconds because you were, I think the last thing that came through salient was you were talking about how some news sites don't want the bad words to show up on their homepage. So the headline will actually say something like knife attack or knife to death or stabbing. And then in the actual copy, um, it'll just say like
What actually happened?
beheaded. Oh yeah, no wait, we got past that, and then we're talking about the Greyhound guy who was like eating the person's inside. Like I knew that the guy on the Greyhound had cut the guy's head off. I didn't know that he like had disemboweled him and was eating that stuff. But I guess maybe I should have read more into it.
The term bus beheader was thrown around. I can't see a reason why you would include it. Well,
Hmm. Can you can you hear me? Are you? Yep. Yeah. So I guess I'll just start paraphrasing for Dave right now because I work and Dave doesn't work. Like, you think this would be my dream for the podcast where it would be like people have to listen to me because the other guest doesn't work, but that's Dave's supposed to be the smart guy who I sound smarter because I'm bouncing ideas off of him and then he backs me up. But I think, yeah, it might even have something to do with COVID. Like, just because everybody's been so stressed out for so long and they're so sad and they don't want to just start throwing in super sensational words into the media like decapitation and stuff because they want people to, I guess, still read the news. And then if you're all like bummed out because you're worried about dying from COVID, you don't really want to go searching out super bad news and stuff. Is that you coming through again? This is awesome. I guess I could just show people my Edmonton cup that I was drinking out of because Dave's on here and it's one of those Starbucks your city cups. This is great podcasting. Dave just sent a message to me over the thing that he didn't hear a word. So I'm gonna send Dave a chat message. Maybe go try going audio only. See if that clears it up. It's funny because it's like we've basically everybody's been doing Zoom for 7 months. You figure the internet would work. Like last time I did the podcast with Dave, we had these issues and then he switched to a different computer to the one he's using now and then it just worked fine. So the logical conclusion to all of this is Dave's house is haunted, and since Halloween is coming up, the ghosts are acting up and they're getting more malicious and violent because they don't want Dave to have the ability to send a cry for help over the internet when they're trying to haunt him until he goes insane. Unfortunately, him and his family. So, I mean, I don't know if you believe in ghosts or not, but this is pretty primary. That's the only explanation. The only explanation for Dave's terrible internet is ghosts. Maybe aliens, definitely not Sasquatch, but I'm going to side with ghosts. So yeah, back to what we were talking about. I think what Dave was trying to say was I worked with Dave in the news room in Calgary for a bit at the Calgary Sun. I was just a graphic designer. I had no say in what would go into the headlines or the copy or anything. I could sometimes they let me edit it and say if certain words were bad or they could be used spelled wrong and stuff. But a lot of the time, what they want to do is like that old saying, if it bleeds, it leads. So you'd figure all these news organizations would just be like, this person was decapitated, blah, and then just hit you hard. Because it's you hear decapitation, you're like, well, that's a news story I'm going to read, whether I feel good about it or not. I don't know how you'd say it's interesting. It's not like you're super pumped to hear about a person who got decapitated. I guess you're just super pumped. I don't know, bad news sells too. I already said, if it bleeds, it leads. And then I guess the other example, the Canadian version, Dave was talking about, the guy on the Greyhound, the bus, people were throwing around words like bus beheading and stuff, but this was in a different time. This was it happened when Twitter was around, but it wasn't like current day Twitter where basically Twitter's everywhere. And that was back when I guess Twitter was still a novelty and it wasn't considered a platform. Remember the old days of Twitter when you could just had your phone that didn't do videos and stuff, and Twitter was set up so that you could text a number to you send a regular text message to a number, and then that number bounced it up onto your Twitter account. And that was the whole genius of Twitter, was you could send a message to the internet with your text messages, because back then, what was this, 11 years ago, I guess, pre 2010, we had the internet, but we didn't have data and mobile phones and stuff. I guess Dave's just gone now. His video is frozen. Now, at least we got your luscious voice. I
There
guess
you go.
we saw what you sounded like. So now we're just going to have to hold that vision in our mind, and I'll just have to deal with the video being on me the whole time.
There
Usually
you go.
I take that opportunity to take a drink or make lewd gestures, but I guess I won't. So,
But we're going.
yeah, we're going.
So that's
This is
good.
good. Well, I guess what the fair thing to do was, while you were gone, I was just talking about how you and me worked together at the Calgary Sun, and I didn't really have any editorial sway because I just designed news infographics and stuff. But it was I remember there's a lot of discussion about what goes into the newspaper and what doesn't.
Yeah.
And I guess the biggest example I always cite for this was in, I think it was Sparwood, BC. There was a mentally challenged person who had kidnapped a boy that he had he was his caretaker at some point. Not his caretaker, but he babysat the boy, or he pre-knew the boy, and he kind of and it was all weird. And ultimately, thank God, nothing happened to the boy. But there was all these stuff that we knew as a newspaper that the police had told us that we decided not to publish.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny. I don't remember those discussions. I remember that story though, but I don't remember some of the, and those may have been had above my pay grade at the
Mhm.
time.
Well,
But
I think,
like,
sorry,
here's it.
now that I can cut you off,
There you go.
I didn't want to say like it was an open discussion in the newsroom. It was discussions that, like you said, were above our pay grade. But then I, through the grapevine, heard about the stuff that was gross and wasn't involved in the article. Um, if you know me, I'll tell you on the side. I don't really want to put it out there because whatever. But yeah, I just wanted to. Yeah, so I guess yeah, just keep talking like I never interrupted you there.
Yeah, but but you're right. There are things that people will learn about. There was a story of former MLA in Alberta who was charged with sexual assault. There were some things about the case that were covered under a publication ban because they would identify the victim. So we weren't able to report on those. But then there were details that were available in the charge sheet when we pulled the court records on this guy that were details about what this individual did to his victim, that would have been legally okay to report them, but at the same time, they're just unsavory details that don't necessarily need to go in a newspaper in a way because they sensationalize the crime and you're only putting it in there to um, be overly salacious. And again, I guess that comes back to the argument about using the term decapitated or beheaded. Are you putting it in there because it's a fact and people deserve to know what the assailant did to this individual to show the brutality of the crime and the overreaction to I understand the religious reasons regarding the depiction of the prophet Muhammad, and again, I know we're not having that discussion about whether it's right or wrong to do it, but it certainly isn't right in my view to cut someone's head off because they depicted the prophet. And I feel that in a case like that, it's warranted to let people know the brutal nature of the crime. That's not sensationalizing it, in my view. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
those are those kind of discussions that get had with news organizations where um, you have to kind of weigh the details and then decide what kind of meets your bar, um, or kind of crosses your line. I remember an instance when I was working in Calgary on Night City desk, and we picked up a story from the Edmonton Sun out of court, and it was a horrible story about a father who had abused the kids in his home, and I believe even the wife in his home. And the judge used the phrase that like he ran the house like he was the king of the castle.
Mm-hmm.
And the reporter at the time decided to put in his lead that the judge also admonished this dad. So the reporter decided to use the phrase king of the castle and also dirty rascal in the lead for his story. And I felt that was in poor taste. And so
I'd agree with you. That's poor taste.
but again, I phoned my colleagues in Edmonton at the time. This is going on, gosh, 11 years ago now. Um, and I phoned my colleagues at the Edmonton Sun at the time, and I said, "Are you going with that as something that's past the editor stage?" And the Night City editor said, "Oh yeah, no, it's fine." And I kind of said, "Okay, well, I wanted to phone and make sure because it kind of it raised a lot of flags down here." And obviously, it goes back to the discussion earlier. Newsrooms will have kind of different standards for what they feel is acceptable. Some may be a little looser, some may be a little tighter. But like everyone knows the famous headline, uh, "Headless body and topless bar," right? It was a New York Post headline.
Yeah.
Um, it's from years, but it's one of those things like it's evocative, and that's what in a lot of ways the news strives to be, is evocative. Um, and I think in a way that, again, there are lines. That one, headless body and topless bar, is obviously being sensational, but it also is being truthful.
Yeah.
That's what that is, and that's what happened, and that's what news organizations try and do, is reflect what is happening in the world to their readers or viewers or listeners. So I don't know. It comes back to the discussion that we were having about what this assailant did to this teacher in France. He cut his head off. He decapitated him. That I wouldn't shy away from those kind of details.
Yeah, no, like it makes sense to say that he decapitated the person because I feel like when you cut someone's head off, saying they were decapitated is just like, yeah, this is objectively what happened. And so I think I was more surprised by it because like you said, you want to use evocative headlines and stuff and missing it and putting knifed to death like this Reuters article said. Like it just sounds awkward and bad English. Like you don't it doesn't even say it's I guess actually it's like the hanged to death. Like you can't say someone was hung, you have to say they were hanged to death because it's some sort of like spelling and grammar like pedantic thing. So maybe I could see they were
Yeah.
going for that sort of deal. Like it was like a pedantic, like old school editor who wanted it to be like literarily correct and so, kind of shy away from the sensationalization.
Yeah.
Is that the proper way
That's
to
true.
say?
And there, like,
Sorry, I cut you off.
to say which
I was going to say, is that
the
the
proper way to
say
say which.
stabbed? Was knifed to death?
No, I like stabbed to death, fatally stabbed. They were, I mean, a fatal knife attack. All of those are true. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if a stabbing is true. Again, it's one of those weird, dark discussions that you'll have sometime in a newsroom where, and especially when like we'll get press releases from the police where they talk about an edged weapon attack, and well, what does that mean? What does
Yeah.
edged weapon attack mean? Were they hit with a cleaver? Were they stabbed? Was it a piece of glass? Was it a knife? Was it a like in the sanitizing of language, you also lose clarity. I remember reading an essay by George Orwell when I was in journalism school. I had to take a grammar class, and it was one of the best classes I took because we talked about language kind of more broadly, and that this essay from Orwell talked about in a way that like once you get into jargon and even sanitizing how you portray things, it loses clarity and it loses impact. And that's one of the things that we try and impress on writers all the time is write clearly, write what happened, be don't get sucked into using the jargon that other people will use, because in the last 30, 40 years there's been a whole industry around communicating in a way that may be more appropriate for an organization to talk about their business, but at the same time it doesn't work in reporting news because things get lost in between, or things become less clear, um, and we want to make sure that we're presenting accurately what was said and what has happened, or even, if a company makes a change in their operations. In Alberta, the government just announced recently that they're going to this they're
You were like good right up until you started talking about what happened in Alberta. You're basically what you said was it's weird because it started getting choppy and then it just got choppier. Like it was like when you on a podcast when you like if you're listening to it and you put it up to like 1.25 speed and it like sounds skippy but you could still hear the words. It was doing that to you, and then
the
once you started
the government's listening in.
yeah, that's like the click of being um, like clicking in and being like, oh, and then yeah, it's probably the government slowing us down. When you were gone, I was saying it was probably
Exactly.
ghosts in your house. So I don't want to cause you abject terror or anything, but after this podcast, maybe take a look around your house to see if there's ghosts, like if there's slime on your walls, or if you have weird magnetic readings, or if you have hot or cold spots in your house.
Always our house is haunted. So no, what I was so about I'm not saying that the Alberta government did this, but I'm using this as an example. So the government announced they were essentially going to downsize 11,000 positions from Alberta Health Services, because they're going to contract out laundry and food services and stuff.
Mhm.
And you could see an organization turning around and saying, we've opted to restructure that will lead to the displacement of a number of jobs in several different departments, but these will be um, there'll be extraneous positions. Like the way that organizations talk nowadays, it can become harder to get a clear meaning. And news organizations, I think, really have to fight hard against that to get to a clear meaning. So I
Mm.
look at, like, I get frustrated if a news organization uses language that isn't clear, and saying that someone was stabbed to death when they had their head cut off isn't clear.
Yeah, that's a very good example. Like, yeah, like what you were saying when they said they were downsizing the health staff or whatever. That just, to me, as a person who doesn't know what's going on in the back, it makes it sound like they're just letting go of the front line, like the nurses and the doctors and stuff. And I'm like, why would you have less staff that are going to help right now, especially during COVID? But so even in their headline, they should be like, the government is releasing support, not support, because that sounds like, I guess you would say,
That sounds like orderlies and nurses and stuff. Yeah, no, I know
yeah.
what you mean. Is it You're right, and maybe even our headline, I'd have to look up the headline on our story, but maybe even the headline on our story wasn't clear enough, because it may have led people to believe that it was nurses and doctors when they're contracting out food service staff and laundry staff and people like that. At the same time, there's arguments that say that you don't want to do that. That's the back and forth right now, but that's a
Hmm.
whole other story. It's Yeah, like the debate over clear language is something, and especially in the last year or so, I've it is interesting that, and maybe it's very inside baseball and very nerdy, but it's something that I really try and pay attention to when I'm editing stories that we're putting out and we're writing headlines, and I want to make sure that we are clear and concise and it makes sense and
Hmm.
there's no ambiguity.
That's good. I don't know. I thought, like, you might think it's nerdy, but I think a lot of people, especially right now, like, they want to know all this stuff that's going on in the news. They want to know how, like, you as an editor are humming and hawing and like struggling over what words exactly to use to get the message out the best. Because right now it just feels like journalism in general is taking a hit because Trump's calling everything fake news, and newspapers are dwindling, and like shitty blog posts are on the uprise. So it seems like, I feel like people knowing what's going on behind the scenes will actually kind of be almost like a redemptive narrative for journalism, I guess. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I agree. And it's one of those things that's also hard to talk about because we also don't like being a part of a story.
Hmm.
I don't, but I'm happy to talk to anybody and try and offer clarity. And if people come at us on social media because of the way a story is framed, I will try. Not in all cases, because I could spend all day on Twitter arguing with people. But
Yeah.
if I feel that there's a value in the conversation that's had, I will have those. I will have, and I have had those conversations with people to try and explain why something was done the way it does. Sometimes people are still mad at the decision that we made, but other times they at least get a sense of, well, okay, well, that makes sense, and they'll say thank you for having that conversation, because that's as much as we don't want to admit it, engaging in this kind of public forum is in a way part of the job now. It's a frustrating part of the job, but or it can be very aggravating. But it is a part of the job in a way. I mean, you know, 30 years ago there was no social media. You'd have a cell phone. People they'd a letter or they'd phone you, and then you'd have a potentially civil conversation on the phone. But it wasn't like someone tags you in a tweet and then tags your paper and tags your boss, and then you have to reply, but then someone else doesn't like it and they get, it becomes a piling on, and
Hmm.
that can be frustrating. uh but it feels like, well, that's where the people are now.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. Like, yeah, I remember when emails first started, that was a big thing. Like pre-Twitter and stuff, if I feel like everything was just sent in emails, and that was like a little bit easier to ignore because, like you said, like these people are tagging you in their tweets, they're tagging your boss, and then they're tagging the paper in general. Whereas before, like when people would complain on email, it was like nobody else but the person receiving the emails could read those. So it wasn't like as much putting you on blast. But I guess they could have still CC'd your boss and emailed you
Yeah.
directly. But I
Yeah.
guess the public wouldn't, in general, wouldn't be seeing these emails because
Yeah.
we know how easy it is to hide emails, don't we? I, I don't want anybody to think that's a segue because I don't want to fucking bridge that topic at all. Um,
That's a good segue though. If we were going
that
to
that
jump
was
to
a
the
good
other thing.
segue, but I do not want to talk like what I could segue into was that Trump was going to try disclose all the information on Hillary's emails or whatever, but that seems like 5 years too late, and we were all sick of that
Yes.
discussion before the last election. God knows nobody wants to hear about those fucking emails now. I'm just like, it's
Yeah, but there's
BD.
a whole new set of emails.
Is there? Oh no! Oh yeah, the new
There's the
emails.
Biden emails.
Oh yeah. Hey, there we go. Let's just. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll talk for about the Biden emails for a bit because I feel like we covered the whole press thing, and this is actually still to do
Yeah.
with the press. Was so all these emails about Hunter Biden, which is Joe Biden's son, about how he had all these interactions with a energy company in the Ukraine, and so this like all ties
In
into
Ukraine.
RussiaGate and everything. Sorry, what did you say?
I just said I echoed your call of Ukraine. I was
Oh,
doing like that Beastie Boys rap thing when like you emphasize a word and
nice. So, kind of off topic, but if I was a person who was running for office in the Ukraine, I would run on a platform of rejuvenization and revitalization, and I would call it New Crane. What do you think?
that's awesome actually.
Yeah.
But it's a little too close to nuclear and the whole
Uh
Chernobyl thing.
ooh, that's a good call. That's a good call. I wonder if they're still sensitive about that whole
And
thing. Well, it was super
I think
popular on
they might be.
Netflix, so they could get some
That's
cachet
true.
there. Hmm. So
And then
anyway,
what's his name? Not Boris Yeltsin. What is the leader of Russia's name?
Putin.
Why can't I remember? Putin. Vladimir Putin might take that a little too literally as well and think, yeah,
Oh
that's a
yeah.
yeah. So
Was
I
that?
mean, it is
Yeah. Sorry.
Ukraine is like as a revitalization slogan is pretty good, but it's also a little close to some kind of
Yeah.
scary history.
Oh, so what we'll do is I will use New Crane just for like Outrage Factory, Outrage Factory stuff, and then nobody will get mad because the Russian government doesn't care what happens over here if it's in the media.
Here you go.
Little
Here's a
joke.
better one.
Yeah.
The this is you're going to run on a campaign of engaging the electorate and being very
Mm-hmm.
democratic, and
Mm-hmm.
your slogan is "I put the U in Ukraine."
That's good. And it has a tinge of sexuality, which makes everything better. Like there's a tiny bit of innuendo with the putting you in something.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So, talking about how to sexualize the word Ukraine, let's go right back to Hunter Biden and these emails. So, are you familiar with this whole subject? Because this is one of those things. Sorry, it was like QAnon last week. How it's like you hear about it over months, and it's kind of like you kind of think you know what's going on, but you don't. So it's like I'm gonna give you my gist of what happened, and then you feel free to correct me. So the way
Okay.
the way I feel happened was this was pre 2000, like back way back when Joe Biden was still the vice president, so that would have been during the Obama presidency. Um, Hunter Biden
Yeah.
became a somehow employed by an energy company out of the Ukraine, and so the guy who is in charge of this company based in the Ukraine talked to Joe Biden and somehow wanted him to get rid of one of the persons in the government of Ukraine who was responsible for regulations and stuff. So they wanted to get rid of that person so that this company could make more money by not following certain regulations. And then Joe Biden said he was going to withhold a certain amount of, I think it was in the billions, of funding to the Ukraine if this person didn't step down. And then ultimately that person stepped down, and then we just went on our merry little way. And now it's coming back to haunt him. Is that correct?
Yeah. That is my basic understanding of it as well. I think that um, I know that there was a Senate investigation into it, and my understanding is the Senate investigation found that there was no wrongdoing on the part of Joe Biden. But again, we're not here to litigate what Joe Biden did or what Hunter Biden did. Um, the whole, yeah, I mean, because, because at this, like it, our opinion on what happened in 2015 or 2014 or whenever it was, we can't do anything about it. The American voter will decide whether they buy the New York Post story or they believe that Joe Biden did something shady, and they may or may not vote for him. Just like the American people will decide that Donald Trump did something really shady to get impeached, because Donald Trump got impeached this year, if you can believe it.
Oh,
That was
yeah.
still this year.
Hey, remember when we thought he was gone? They're
Despite
like,
the
oh,
the
he's
hellfire
impeached.
of 2020.
Yeah, he was impeached. He's not going to be president anymore. And it's like, now he got impeached. He just fucking ran right through, didn't care. And now he's like still running for reelection. Like, and everybody's like, wait, I thought if he was impeached, that means that, like, for me personally, I was like, well, if he's impeached, then at the very least, the Republicans are going to have to find another guy to be the head Republican to run for the presidency. But nope, it's just he's impeached. He's like, yeah, he impeached me,
No,
but brushes off the shoulder. Nothing happened. I'll see you in a couple months when I'm going to be the president again.
yeah. So again, we're not here to litigate that. But what was really interesting, so the New York Post has this story because they have Hunter Biden's emails because he took his computer in for repair in some place in Delaware, and then
Just left it
it
there.
somehow his hard drive and just he just left it there, never came back for it, and then somehow the hard drive got into the hands of Rudy Giuliani's lawyer, and then like the whole thing is bonkers. The whole trying
Yeah.
to explain the ins and outs of the story is bonkers. But then, so the New York Post runs this story. Then everyone starts trying to poke holes in the New York Post reporting. Like you can go to Snopes and read a whole takedown of the reporting in the New York Post. But then somewhere Twitter and Facebook basically say like, yeah, no, you can't share that on our platform. And then all of a sudden it's like the Facebook and Twitter are carrying water for the Democrats, despite the fact that, you know, Facebook is like the biggest stories on Facebook right now are um, Republican centered stories or shared from right wing sites. Um, anyway, so there's this whole argument of the New York Post story. It gets blocked from sharing on Twitter. Twitter does a horrible job of explaining why it's being blocked from being shared on Twitter. Accounts get suspended because they're trying to share it, or get threatened to be suspended if they don't take down their tweet. And it just is a whole mess for the social media companies. Um, and the New York Post gets a lot of free advertising out of it for their
Yeah.
story. Everyone's curious about what the story says. And so I think the story has bigger legs than it may have had the story just went out there and then everyone had a chance to debunk it. You know, as someone who works at a news organization, if someone finds cracks in our reporting and they want to comment us and say this is wrong, this is bad, I would hope that that's not the case. I hope that we don't have people writing stories that are full of holes.
Mm-hmm.
But like that's one thing. But to have a social media company say, "Well, no, you can't share it," it'd be one thing for them to say, like they've done with the president, this tweet contains inaccurate information and put a warning on it. That'd be one thing. But to have the company turn around and say, no, you can't share it. We don't like what is in it is bad. We don't want it shared. That's a whole other level uh of like, is it censor? Yeah, I guess it would be censorship. You can't share this, so it's been censored.
Yeah.
Um
Like, I
it's
was
a
thinking,
slippery slope.
Oh yeah, sorry. I was going to say I was one of the reasons I wanted to have you on was to talk about this, but also to ask you about the New York Post specifically because I've never really heard of the New York Post. I mean, I'm not paying attention to East Coast U.S. newspapers and stuff, but basically the way it got treated, I was like, is this like the equivalent of the Weekly World News? Like, is this just one of those news organizations that just like um spreads BS? And then if so, then I'm okay. Like if the Weekly World News had this story and you'd be like, well, it's the Weekly World News, that's not true. Uh, like if it was like a known false commodity newspaper, then I'm okay with them like banning it. But like you said, it's crazy that Twitter said you can't share this post, and then even like somehow banning the link, like the actual link to the story. If you would put that in the tweet wouldn't go through.
Hmm.
So like this is one of those weird like gray areas where you're like, well, what like since Twitter isn't really sort of like a service or like a government platform, and they are like you could say that's a private company, so they are allowed to kind of do stuff like that. But at the same time, I feel like New York Post should kind of sue them for defamation. Like not like direct like Twitter never said, "Hey, New York Post is full of shit, don't read it." But the fact that they're banning it and not letting you put up the article itself is kind of like passively being like, "Yo, don't read this. It's not real." It's basically like we're fake news or they're fake news or whatever. So if I was the New York Post, I would definitely sue them and be like, by their not allowing us to be posted on like not even just banning the New York Post's Twitter account, not letting anybody, like not letting me put the tweet up to the news story is like saying this is fake. Don't trust this source. Like I guess they still kind of drove traffic to there, but do you know what I'm trying to say? Do you think that they could sue them?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if they could like again in America. It's really hard to prove like the defamation law in the states. I think is really errs on the side of the First Amendment, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I don't know if they could if the New York Post would. I don't know enough about American law, but my I look at it as not necessarily a defamation piece. I think that you're right. I think that by blocking story, they drove more people externally to the New York Post who were curious about this had today than had they just let it go. Um, as I say, I've read takedowns of the reporting that say this questionable. These are screenshots, so we don't know if the emails are real or there are other problems with the reporting. For those who are on there, if you want to go kind of dig into this more, there I'm sure you can Google like fact checking the New York Post Hunter Biden article, and you can get a breakdown of the ins and outs there. Um, if there are
Mm-hmm.
legitimate concerns with a news story, I don't see an issue with putting a warning with a
Yeah.
tweet. I don't like the idea of Twitter blocking links from legitimate news organizations. And people listening may say, well, the New York Post is just a tabloid rag. They're kind of the equivalent of the UK Sun. They're like an American version of the UK Sun. They're a conservative tabloid, very
Okay.
sensationalistic uh, news organization, and they've been critical of Joe Biden. Um, you know, I
Oh,
just
one
don't
thing.
like. I don't like the idea.
Yeah.
Like if enough people like didn't like, and I know that I'm the example I'm going to use is opinion columnists, but if Twitter started blocking opinion columnists because they didn't like that columnist's opinion, like that's not where that site should go. The whole idea
Yeah.
is for people to tweet out opinions and videos and like engage in debate and be controversial and I don't know. I just don't the whole idea and Twitter's excuse came way too late and like they didn't communicate that at least in their reasoning, it's because the screenshots in the link had personal information that would violate their terms of service. Like I'm not supposed to go tweeting information about you your email address or where you live or
Hmm.
anything like that, that would violate their terms of service. So that was Twitter's rationale, was that, don't like it because it contained all this personal information. But that came
Yeah.
way after the fact.
One
Damage
aside
was
I wanted
done
to
for
bring
them
up.
pretty
Sorry,
early
one
on.
aside I wanted to bring up. Like, yeah, their excuse was that they showed the emails of Hunter Biden and the guy who owned this or who was like part of the energy company from the Ukraine. But one of the weirdest things was that the guy from the Ukraine, his email address was a Gmail address, which you figure if you're like this big corporation, you'd at least have like a .com company specific email. That's just like
Yeah.
another aside. But what I think what the Sun should have done was been like, okay, if we're not allowed to show these email addresses, and then just do like the little redacted line over their email, like a little black bar over Hunter's email and the other guy's email, and then be like, okay, Twitter, we fixed it, and then see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I haven't gone back and looked at the story recently, but I don't think that they've taken anything out. I think they're making a stand here and saying this is ridiculous. And
Yeah.
because they're not directly tweeting that information either, right? Like
Mm.
the information is contained in a link. And I don't know, like at what point does Twitter get to say what you can put on your own website?
Yeah,
Even
exactly.
if you buy that argument, like
Hmm.
we decide what goes on our website. You can't decide that we can't put a link up because what we do on our site you wouldn't allow on your site,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Like,
Like if
yeah, I get what you're saying. Like they're saying you broke the terms of service because you're showing someone else's email, but the New York Post could be like, well, we're not showing that email on your site. We're showing it on our site and just linking to the article that shows this. So I'd agree with you. Like they should definitely not be allowed
yeah,
to not link something. Like even have a warning, like warning, this shows the personal email address of blah blah blah, so it breaks our services or our code of service or whatever it's called. Yeah, I don't know. I'm ultimately I'm
yeah.
with you. They could
So
have
I don't know.
both
It
parties could have
is
held this differently.
Yeah, it is one of those stories where you kind of look and think like, wow, like this is social media plays such a huge role in political campaigns now, and I understand that there's concerns about how it's utilized to either manipulate or to obfuscate or to misrepresent things, and that's done all the time. Um, Hilariously, like just yesterday, I think it was, Donald Trump was tweeting out what he thought was a headline that proved that Twitter was blocking the New York Post because the story was mean to Joe Biden. Like that was the tweet, but it came from a parody news site.
Of course, Donald Trump. On the other hand, I hate parody news sites like the Beaverton and stuff. It's like I don't know. I feel like they're just old people traps that are just set up to like trick old people. Like in regular newspapers, like say the Edmonton Sun wants to run something that's an ad. They're not allowed to use the same font. They have to put at the top of the page, "This is an advertisement," and they have to make it like clearly recognizable as not regular news copy. But like you have all these sites that are just like trying everything they can to be conceived as regular news sites, but it's like a lampoon site.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that gets like some of them are more obvious than others. Like The Onion is very obviously satire.
Hmm.
And there are some that are hew a little more close to the truth, or they cut a little too close to the truth, and so it can be misconstrued. I'm not as concerned about those, but it is funny to see that the president of the United States actually tweeted that out as saying, "See, we were right. Twitter did it because," but it's like no, the Babylon Bee is very much not a real news site.
Yeah,
Um,
and then he's just like if he missed his chance to just be like fake news. Like all someone had to be was like that's literally fake news. um,
and I mean that's the accusation against Twitter, right? They did it because it was mean to Joe Biden. and that's
Yeah.
Twitter has to wear that for a while. Like it
Mhm.
wasn't a good look on them. I think it helped amplify the story in the post. I think it did the opposite of what, if it was blocked for the reasons that they said, I think it was pretty weak. If it was blocked for the reasons that everyone thinks that they did, it didn't work anyway because everyone has still been talking about the New York Post story.
Yeah. Ironically, every time somebody sides with the Democrats and tries to like push down Trump, it has the opposite effect. Like, if anything, this helped Trump, not because it made Joe Biden look bad, but it made it look like Twitter is clearly biased on the side of the Democrats. And then people like see this and they're like, wait, what other stuff is biased against
Yeah.
the Republicans? And it's
Yeah.
like, then you get like, it's like you start getting into this, like, and then you got to get into all this shadow banning of like Republican and right wing accounts and all this stuff. And then it's just like the major damage that this is going to cause is it's going to delegitimize other actions that other places had taken against like right wing or Republican accounts that they were completely justified in. Like, if some super right wing thing was saying something bad and hate speechy and it got banned for that, and it should have been banned, and that ban would have been upheld. Now everybody's going to take a second look at it and be like, but they banned this other thing wrongfully. Is this one
Yeah.
rightfully banned?
Yeah. I mean, and that's why you get sites like Parlay or Parlor or whatever. I think it's called Parlay. It's like no censor Twitter. I
Oh
don't know how
yeah.
it's doing. I think a bunch of, yeah, like it's one of those weird things. The internet's a weird thing. Is it's supposed to be like an open, free thing, but it's also run by companies who have shareholders and
Hmm.
images and like
Yeah.
brands that they want. Like it's a bizarre hybrid where it's the Wild West, but at the same time it's very controlled. Um,
Hmm.
and maybe it's not all that it's cracked up to be. We
Yeah.
should just all like kill the internet and no
It's
podcasts,
yeah.
no Twitter, no, just go talk to people on the phone.
It's like
And I don't
this
know.
thing I learned about in journalism school called advertiser chill. It's where like a newspaper or news organization won't say something because they're scared that it will go against the beliefs of some advertiser and that it will just cause them to get less money. And that's basically what we're seeing with Twitters. They're like, they don't want to do all this stuff because it's in the long run it's going to cost them money from certain advertisers and stuff. Dave, do you want to close with that since it's 6:30 and you said you wanted to get out of here on time? Not like last time where we had a 90-minute episode.
Well, it was good. It was a fun chat. I would like a 90-minute chat today would have been good. It's a shame we had all the internet problems that we've been having.
Yeah,
But it's fun to
that's
rattle off. But yeah, we should probably pop that.
sorry.
I said, yeah, we should probably wrap up with that one.
Yeah, right on my poignant advertiser chill point. Yeah, so thanks again for
Yes.
doing this. Sorry for everybody for the problems with the internet. I take full responsibility. You could take it out of all the money you were going to pay me. I will clean it up, and I haven't decided if I'll leave the like live video as it happens on the Facebook site, but I'll either replace that video with the like cleaned up one, or I'll just add the cleaned up one. I'll do that, yeah. Or I'll add a link to the cleaned up one so you can give us YouTube views. I don't know. But Dave, we
There you
talked
go.
about your podcast before. It's 10-3, right?
10-3, 10/3.
Oh, what's the significance of
It's
that? I
you
forgot
can
to ask you last time.
it's 10 provinces and 3 territories in Canada. We try and do stories
Oh,
from across Canada. We haven't done much on northern communities, but that's the goal is to kind of cover off Canada coast to coast to coast.
okay. Dave, it's okay. I heard their
So,
internet's worse than yours.
yeah, you can send all complaints about tonight's show to Telus at Telus. Um,
Yeah, at Telus. I'm sure
right on.
they are not
Yes.
getting their cry of internet complaints at this point either. Um, Yeah, and if you want to see Dave's other work, just pick up an Edmonton Sun. Are you with the Edmonton Journal as well, or no?
Yeah, we're all one big merged newsroom.
Okay, yeah. So pick up either of those papers, and you'll support Dave. And yeah,
There you go.
I think
Thanks
that's
for
it.
having me on, Dale.
Yeah, no problem.
Right on.
I love having you on. You're like, I was gonna joke about how you're the most grown-up guest we have because, but I think you are. Like your credentials and stuff. Dave Breakenridge, most grown-up Outrage Factory guest. You could put that title
There
on your
you go.
resume if you want. I'm okay with it.
I'll change my Twitter bio.
Put it on your LinkedIn page.
There you go.
All right, everybody. Until next time, stay angry. Are you ready? Oh shit, you froze.
Breakenridge. Yeah, sorry, this should be the whole show. This is still getting a lag on your. I don't know what's going here. So how am I coming through? Am I coming all right? Can you hear me?
I just heard that, but nothing before that.
Ah.
Scientific stuff that I don't know the answer to? Probably.
But knife attack appears more accurate. A fatal knife attack is more accurate than a stabbing. But I find it strange that if you have, I would like to err on this if you have the details, work the details. Especially the word heading is stark, it is graphic, it is
Oh,
grid, but it
Dave,
gets to
you're
the heart of
garbled.
what happened to this individual. But there are different calls the newsroom make on a day-to-day basis around, well, what is much put in a story, and especially when you start covering cases about things like sexual assault, that some of the details they discussed in cases, you know, I find that those can be too much to go into a news story, and you in some instances have to sanitize what happened. But in this case, I did notice that organizations were decapitating or beheading because that is precisely what happened to the teacher.
Dave, you're frozen up. Yeah, so sorry everybody. Yeah, it looks like Dave's having, I guess it could be me too. I don't want to put all the trouble on Dave. But oh, was I like paused up
This
for a
all gets
bit?
edited out.
Oh yeah,